Dead Cells has many biomes. In most cases, while it may seem that they exist for aesthetic purposes, choosing the right biomes for your run may actually increase or decrease your odds of winning. It may seem a little overwhelming sometimes, choosing which biomes to enter, but don't worry, because in this updated biome guide for the Castlevania DLC, I'm going to be going over every biome in Dead Cells and offer some insights of when you should go there, what they offer, and how they will be impacting your run. In addition to that, I'm going to be suggesting a quote-unquote optimal route that's considered to maximize your chances of winning. That's mostly done by endgame players. All sections of this guide will be time-stamped in the description, and hopefully by the end of this video, you too will become a master at choosing biomes in Dead Cells. First of all, let's go over some general rules regarding biome selection and why you should care about it. Now, if you're just starting out, I'll be honest, your biome choice won't matter that much. Even if you just go to your favorite biomes all the time, you'll be just fine. As someone that likes to research the meta for every game I play, I find it very fun to min-max every aspect of the game, and I like to imagine that my biome choice can influence a big part of how I play. This guide mainly goes into the intricacies of each biome and explores the finer details of what distincts one from another. For example, on 3 boss cells and up, scroll fragments enter the equation, and different biomes give varying amounts of them. In addition, health fountains become more scarce, meaning biomes containing food shops may increase in desirability over others. Here are some of the nuances of biome choice, and while it may not be as important if you're fairly new to the game, it can be helpful to start thinking about these things. Here are several factors that can influence your choice of one biome over others, some of which include higher amounts of rewards, routing to fight specific bosses, has a curse chest or food shop, is suited for certain builds. As of version 3.3, there is a handy tool in your map menu where you can see all the biomes in the game, as well as what other biomes it leads to and from. However, you will need to have seen the biomes and the paths at least once in order for it to register on the map. While this tool is good for looking at the game's biomes at a glance, it doesn't give too much detailed information about each one of them, such as the amount of scroll fragments or whether or not it contains a food shop. For a more detailed interface, you can check out the full biome map on the Dead Cells wiki. Just make sure it's the wiki.gg domain and not the fandom one. That one's no longer being updated. I really like this tool as it gives all the information you'll need about a particular biome or route. I'll briefly go over the legend so we know what we're looking at. Each biome will be indicated by a series of symbols. At its base, you can see how many scrolls and dual stat scrolls that a biome will offer, a chance of a curse chest spawning, and the item quality that's offered in the shops. In addition, panels to the left will also indicate what kind of rewards are offered in addition to the base rewards. So if we take a look at Graveyard, for example, we can see that it will offer 2 scrolls and 1 dual stat scroll, as well as a shop quality of 4. In addition, the curse chest chance will say 110, and this is because this biome contains a guaranteed curse chest, which puts it at 100, and then an additional 10% chance for a second one to spawn. On 1 boss cell, you can see that it offers a passageway that will lead you to 2 item pedestals. On 2 boss cells, it will offer a food shop. On 3 boss cells, you get 2 scroll fragments, some additional cells, as well as an additional scroll. You get 3 additional scroll fragments, as well as a pedestal room. As for prefacing this guide, the main reason which I will be recommending certain biomes over others is the amount of scrolls that they give. If you've seen my beginner's guides or iceberg video, because of exponential scaling of damage, it's considered to be more advantageous to have as many stats in one color as possible, and maximizing scroll fragments is the main way to achieve that. Just keep in mind that if you're just starting out, then I would say just go wherever you want. Discovering a new biome always has a sense of novelty, and it's best to enjoy the exploration while you can. If you're not at 3 boss cells yet, don't worry too much about scroll fragments. Alright, finally, let's get started from the beginning. Every run starts in the prisoner's quarters. The game plan here is pretty simple. Get some gear. You don't need to have any synergies right away, just find whatever works. Pick up the 2 scrolls and try to get 30 kills for the kill door. You can ignore the 2-minute timed one. Assuming you have all the DLCs, you have 4 different choices for the Depth 2 biome. In this guide, I'm going to be referring to levels as Depth. So the second biome will be Depth 2, the third biome will be Depth 3, and so on. Now, before I talk about the biome specifically, I want to go over the matter of routing. If you take a look at your in-game map, not all the first bosses can be routed to from every Depth 2 level. So with the first decision of biomes, you can actually lock yourself out of being able to fight certain bosses. I'll go over each of the first bosses in detail later because some builds actually perform better at them than others. I would also advise against buying anything from the shops until you're at the depth 3 biomes, as the shop quality is just not as high as the ones you get later in the game. So let's go through the biomes. The default depth 2 biome is Promenade, and it's probably one you're very familiar with. I consider this biome as a pretty generalist biome and a good choice if you don't have a solid setup already. You got your range of melee and flying enemies and a small bit of traps to dodge. However, I actually would recommend against going to this biome on higher difficulties. On 3 to 4 boss cells, failed experiments will replace the zombies, and bombardiers will replace the grenadiers. These are pretty troublesome to deal with, but on top of that, you have to worry about these little bastards. Because of the protectors, you often have to track down the dummy to disable the shield, so you can actually start doing damage to the monsters. Given that enemies will teleport to you in the higher boss cell levels, it's just a big headache to deal with this early into the game and can often lead you scrambling to kill off the dummy while attracting a wave of monsters' attention. You get 2 scroll fragments at max, which is okay. The second depth 2 biome in the base game is Toxic Sewers. As the name suggests, its corridors are tight and cramped, while buzz cutters and worms try to attack you from all directions. Toxic Sewers actually gets a leg up from all the other biomes at this stage, as it contains 3 scroll fragments while the other stages only contain 2. Structurally, this biome tends to favor builds that can react to threats quickly. Enemies burrowing out of the ground, kamikaze bats trying to ambush you, buzz cutters flying in to shave off your health in seconds. Any build that's a little slow to respond to threats coming from above or below you can struggle a little. However, with certain skills, you can make any build work here. Let's show an example. Say you have the torch as your main weapon. The torch suffers from low range. Normally, it may not be the wisest choice to go to the sewers, but if you have something like the lacerating aura to compensate for the lack of range, you can still be able to respond quickly to flying threats. If you have the Bad Seed DLC, the Arboretum is also available to you. A prime feature of this biome is its large open space. Its corridors are long and wide, perfect for sniping targets from afar. Ranged builds will shine especially well here. Not only that, the Arboretum contains Thornies, where if you hit them from the spiky end with a melee weapon, it will damage you as well. However, this is not a problem with ranged weapons. Hit them from whatever direction you desire. There are some exceptions where you can hit them with a melee strike, such as with whip weapons. This biome contains 2 scroll fragments at max. Finally, the newest biome comes from the recent Castlevania DLC. Castle Outskirts is also a biome I find to be a general good all-rounder biome, except you don't have to worry about those pesky protectors. The enemy variety is quite balanced, and there's a bit of platforming to keep things interesting. The only demerit I will say is that the damage of those skeletons that throw bones at you is a little bit overtuned at the moment, and does way too much damage this early in the game. Still, if you're undecided about your build, Castle Outskirts can be a good choice to shake up your runs. Before we get to the depth 3 biomes, there's actually an additional optional level that you can go to, and one I would recommend visiting each run if it's available to you. The 2 optional biomes are Prison Depth and Corrupted Prison. Both Promenade and Arboretum lead to Prison Depth, while only Toxic Sewers leads to Corrupted Prison. Structurally, they're very similar to one another. They both contain a cursed chest in the beginning, and they both contain a shop and has some pretty tough enemies. Although it may seem a little pointless to go through an entire biome just for that one additional scroll, it's still a good idea to maximize your scroll count and get some additional golden cells. So again, if you can access these optional biomes, I think it's a good idea to visit them every run. Castle Outskirts from the Castlevania DLC, however, does not have access to either biomes, but the consecutive biome after that has an additional scroll to make up for it. As of now, there are actually 5 depth 3 biomes. This biome also determines which first boss you'll face. Some general advice at this point of the run is to use the gold you saved up to secure a build or gear that can handle the boss that you'll be facing after it. This means the depth 3 biome is the point of the run where I believe is safe to invest in weapons from shops. The gear you buy is usually good enough to carry you to the end of the run, or at the very least safe enough to not worry about finding an upgrade later on. Let's go through each of these locations in order of how much value I think they will provide to the player for the run. Ramparts sadly gets the short end of the stick. This is a biome that I would say on higher boss cell levels, just try to avoid coming here. There's two reasons for that. First, compared to the other Depth 3 biomes, Ramparts gives the least amount of scroll fragments at a measly 2. Second, the boss that follows it is Concierge, which is a boss that I think you should avoid when you get deeper into the game. However, I do understand that Ramparts is most likely your default Depth 3 biome when you start the game. There's nothing wrong with climbing up here if you happen to like its aesthetics or you don't know how to access the other biomes. What I am trying to say is that on higher boss cell levels, if you want to min-max your damage output, Ramparts is not a good choice. I should mention that you can actually access Conjunctivius, though it's locked by a 3 boss cell door, but by then you wouldn't be here anyways. The other Depth 3 biome that I think should generally be avoided is Ossuary. The same reasons apply here. It contains 3 scroll fragments, which is 1 more than Ramparts. However, you can only fight Concierge, which, as I have stated before, is not a good boss to fight as you get more experience. On 5 boss cells, because of the long corridors, you can end up accumulating a lot of melees, which just complicates things. Again, if you happen to stumble upon Ossuary when you're exploring the game, there's nothing wrong with that. It's never a bad thing to see more of the game. Next up is Morass of the Banished from Bad Seed. It's a cool vertical level with lots of squishy enemies. Just be careful of those blowgunners and other things that will ambush you. You can only fight Mama Tick as your first boss, but luckily is a boss that I think is worthwhile to fight regardless of boss cell level. Morass offers 4 scroll fragments at max. I should also mention that it contains a food shop and a guaranteed curse chest, so try to save up at least 10 enemies on the map before you pop it. On the other side, we have Ancient Sewers. This biome is what I consider the most challenging but also rewarding Depth 3 biome. It trumps the other levels with a whopping 5 scroll fragments, which compared to the Rampart's pathetic 2, is almost an additional scroll. It also gets a leg up when considering shop quality. Down here, the level of gear is 4, which compared to the previously mentioned 3 biomes, are all 3 across the board. However, Ancient Sewers is also the only Depth 3 biome that does not contain a food shop. You can only access Conjunctivius as your first boss from here. Last but not least, Dracula's Castle is the newest contender to the list. You can only access this biome from castle outskirts, and doing so will skip over the optional prison biomes, though it will compensate by giving you an additional scroll. In terms of rewards, Dracula is pretty generous, as the 4 max scroll fragments matches that of the Morass, and also having the same shop quality of 4 that matches the Ancient Sewers. There's also a food shop and a guaranteed curse chest. You will fight Death as the brand new first boss after this. Now, this video is not a boss guide, so I won't be going over all of the first bosses in detail. However, a point I do want to bring up is the matter of routing. What's a little annoying about the run up until the first boss encounter is that not all biomes lead to all bosses. I won't bore you with the specifics, but here are the main points of routing that can lock you out from fighting certain bosses. If you went to Toxic Sewers as your second biome, you cannot fight Mama Tick or Death, as there's no way to path to any biomes that leads to those bosses. If you went to Castle Outskirts as your second biome, Death is the only first boss you can path to, which means the remaining Promenade and Arboretum can path to any boss except for Death. If you're not sure about the specific routes, you can either bring up the biome map on the wiki or use your in-game map. Alright, let's talk about the bosses now. There's a couple reasons why you will want to path to a specific boss. The main ones being, of course, the amount of scroll fragments they give, as well as what your build is, since some build will perform better on some bosses than others. Let's briefly go over them. Concierge is the easiest boss and one you've rarely seen me fight throughout the 2 years of showcases I put out. The reason is that he only gives 3 scroll fragments at max, which is the lowest among the first set of bosses. Again, I understand that he is the first boss that you encounter and fighting him to get closer to your first victory is completely fine, but I would generally avoid Concierge on higher boss cell levels. It goes without saying, he's a pretty basic boss and any build will perform just fine. Mama Tick is an interesting encounter. She drops 4 scroll fragments at max, and while most builds will work, one major characteristic is that the arena is flooded with water. This means any build that references fire will be much less effective. Something like the Vampire Killer won't be able to crit since Mama Tick can't be set on fire. She's also propped up against a wall, meaning something like Impaler will always crit, while Assassin's Dagger won't be able to crit at all, since you can't hit her backside. Sometimes it's worthwhile to think outside the box of what your build is most suited for. Conjunctivius boasts dropping the most scroll fragments at a whopping 5, making it the most rewarding first boss to fight. However, she will be flying all over the arena. Without a fast build or ways to pin her down if you happen to be running a slower setup, the fight can be drawn out for longer than you may like. Conjunctivius also doesn't have a front side or backside, meaning weapons like the Vorpan and Assassin's Dagger won't be able to crit. If you're coming up on this fight from the Ancient Sewers, try your best to fish for a good skill or weapon that can deal with this flying menace from the shop. Finally, Death is the newest addition to the first set of bosses. Tragically, as of now, he only drops 3 scroll fragments. I really wish it was 4, but it might be changed later. Death, alongside Concierge, is another generalist boss where I think any build will do just fine in, so that's a plus at least. He's got a massive hitbox, doesn't move around all that much, so any weapon with good enough range or speed will do just fine. After you defeat the first boss, from here on out until you fight your second boss is what I would consider mid-game. Luckily, the routing for the second set of bosses isn't as strict as the first. What I mean is that regardless of what boss you fought, you can route to any of the second bosses. Again, I won't bore you with the specifics. If you want to see exactly which biomes lead where, just pull up the wiki or use the in-game map. The main goal of choosing the mid-game biomes is routing to your desired second boss. Currently, there are 3 bosses that you can route to: Timekeeper, Giant, and Scarecrow. Instead of going over the biomes first, in this mid-game section I'll go over the second set of bosses first, as I think choosing the right boss to aim for at this point is the main goal, and just think of the biomes as a means to actually getting there. The reason that choosing the right second boss to fight matters is again twofold. And you probably saw this one coming, but the 3 bosses give varying amounts of scroll fragments. And second, some builds won't work as effectively against some of them, which can put you at a disadvantage. So let's go through the general properties for the second set of bosses so you have a better understanding of how to approach them. The default second boss is Timekeeper, one you probably already faced once. She's pretty fast and the fight itself is fairly fast-paced. However, just like Concierge, I would consider Timekeeper to be a fairly well-rounded boss. Any build will do just fine, but faster setups may find more success. Timekeeper drops 3 scroll fragments. Giant is the second boss that you can fight. This behemoth has some pretty sluggish movements, but they hit decently hard. However, there are a couple caveats that the Giant has. This boss cannot be stunned, rooted, frozen, or pushed back. Any build that relies on these properties will not be able to crit. In addition, Giant does not have a front side or a back side, so weapons that crit based on the orientation of an enemy, like Vorpan, will not be able to deal additional damage. What is really good about fighting the Giant is that he drops 4 scroll fragments, which is an entire scrolls amount. In addition, fighting Giant also gives you the option to skip the subsequent biome and go straight to Hand of the King, which is the final boss of the run. And finally, Scarecrow finds its way into the mix. I usually think of this boss as a challenge route. While fast and sticky weapons will shred through the Scarecrow just fine, this boss tends to stick to you like a glue, unleashing rapid strikes that require dodging or parrying. You have relatively little breathing room between attacks, but the openings are there as you become more accustomed, and the Scarecrow drops 3 fragments. Since all 3 bosses drop similar amounts of scroll fragments, I would say all 3 are valid choices to gun for. Now that I've covered the bosses, let's see some examples of certain builds that I will have and how that will impact my choice for the second boss. In this Tombstone run, I chose Giant, because the swings of the Tombstone was a little too slow for my liking, and I believe Giant will be the fight to allow this beat stick to shine the brightest in. In my baseball bat showcase, I chose Scarecrow, because the bat has relatively low range and requires targets to be rooted to deal crits. Since Giant can't be rooted and Timekeeper can run to the opposite sides of the arena, I didn't mind facing the Scarecrow in some close range combat. In my Gilded Yumi showcase, I chose Timekeeper because my synergies needed foes to be far away to deal extra damage. Giant can't be pushed back, and Scarecrow runs up at you relentlessly. Timekeeper was the only choice left. These are some examples of how different builds are more suited for certain bosses over others. Obviously, I can't account for every single scenario, but if you really want to test the effectiveness of a build against a boss, you can head over to the training room and use it to experiment with practice dummies to test if your build can handle the real deal. One thing I want to state is that the advice I give does not exist in a vacuum. Just because a build may seem weak against a boss, that doesn't mean you're not allowed to go there. If you don't mind fighting at a disadvantage or just like fighting a particular boss, then by all means do whatever you like. Now that you've selected a second boss to route to, let's go over the depth 4 biomes. First of all, unlike Ramparts and Ossuary from the early game section, I would say all the biomes from here on out carry similar amounts of rewards, so all of them are valid to visit without really getting too big of a noticeable disadvantage, even on high boss cell levels. Still Village is a fairly simple biome, it's pretty short, and the rewards aren't bad. Sure, those pirate captains are gonna be a nuisance, but you can get through the biome in no time. It unfortunately gets the short end of the stick, only containing 2 scroll fragments with nothing else really that noticeable. It also houses a food shop, and no guaranteed curse chest. I would consider the other options first, but if you want a low-risk biome, Still Village is a valid choice. Graveyard is what I would consider to be another good all-rounder biome. It's got monsters of varying sizes, a curse chest, and a food shop. The 3 scroll fragments is also a sizable amount. This is usually my default biome at this stage of the game if I route here, unless I want to shake things up or I just really want to visit one of the other stages. Next up we have Slumbering Sanctuary. This is what I would consider to be a challenge biome. The teleporters are spaced quite far apart, and these giant golems will be the bane of any new player's existence. They will teleport you to their location if you get too far away, forcing you to fight them. You won't find a lot of squishy enemies here, so be prepared to deal with monsters that are either mid or large sized. The biome rounds out with 4 scroll fragments, which is the most out of the biomes at this depth level. However, a major caveat is that Sanctuary is also the only biome at this level that does not contain a food shop. Plus, the curse chest here can be especially challenging, given there's barely any small enemies to get freebie kills on. I don't visit the Slumbering Sanctuary very often, but it is an option if you feel up for the challenge. Finally, the Fatal Falls DLC adds the Fractured Shrines biome. A couple of unique properties is that there's quite a lot of parkouring you have to do, and those traps and crumbling platforms can lead you to some nasty falls. Fatal even. There's only 2 scroll fragments, but what I really like about the shrines is that there is a chamber in which you get to pick 1 out of 3 legendary items. Given the legendary reworks, most weapons have a unique affix that can completely set it apart from its regular variant, and overall a good way to shake up your runs in ways you probably never expected. You also got your usual food shop and curse chest. On to the biome that precedes the second boss. This is also the part of the run where items in the shops are their most powerful. If you want to beef up your gear to as close as how powerful they can get, be sure to hit up the shops in these levels. Clock Tower is your default biome before fighting Timekeeper. Not much to say about it, it's a biome that has a lot of verticality as you scale your way up the tower. 4 scroll fragments, which is actually quite high for a biome unlocked right from the get-go. Just stay watchful for those spikes and spinning maces, and you should be fine. Forgotten Sepulchre has a unique darkness mechanic that can hurt or even kill you if you don't find sources of light fast enough. Surprisingly, for such a threatening ambience, it only has 3 scroll fragments, which is the lowest out of the depth 5 biomes. Plus, there's also a curse chest, but don't worry, the darkness mechanic can't insta-kill you when you're cursed. I know some people may be put off by the darkness, but I usually don't find it to be that bad. So here's some tips. There are 2 forms of light sources. The golden lamps that will always be lit, and small white lamps that you have to light yourself by standing by them. These small lamps will break after a while, so it's best advised to just go through each section of the biome once to avoid any backtracking. If you find yourself just about to take damage from the darkness, I usually find the best course of action is to not beeline to the last lamp you found, but to rather push forward instead. I find the lamps are placed so that you have ample time to run from one to the next. If the distance between the last lamp you found is decently far, then chances are the next one is just around the corner. You might be wondering about that portable lamp that you can buy in the beginning of the biome. Just don't buy it, it's pretty useless. Giving up a skill slot doesn't warrant a utility tool that has no combat purposes. The only scenario where I would buy it is if I had to backtrack for something on the map, like an uneaten piece of food, and I want to get to it since all the surrounding lit lamps have all expired. Dying Shores is the biome from Fatal Falls that leads to the Scarecrow boss. You scale your way down a cliff in this biome. It's again an all-rounder biome with 4 fragments. However, what's really interesting is that the enemy variety in the shores is dependent on the biomes you visited that run. If you went to the Castlevania biomes, then the same monsters you fought there will appear here. If you went to the Corrupted Prison, then slammers and sludge monsters would spawn. You can kind of predict what monsters you'll face, but overall, you're probably strong enough at this point that any monster won't be too much to handle anymore. so I mostly just see this gimmick as a cool Easter egg, if anything. Finally, the good old cavern claims its throne as possibly one of the most, if not the most rewarding biome in the game. It boasts having 5 scroll fragments, and the shop quality is the highest in the game. On 4/5 BC, you can buy level 12 gear, which by normal means is the highest you can achieve. The shop quality is even higher than High Peak Castle or the Shipwreck, which are biomes that appear after the cavern. The only biome that matches the cavern's shop quality is the 5 BC biome, so that's an impressive feat. However, cavern is also home to some of the most dangerous monsters in the game. Ground shakers that can drop crystals from the ceiling, and arbiters that fire multiple projectiles at you. If you can handle the heat, then cavern is a biome you should seriously consider if it's available. After you beat the second boss, you can safely consider yourself to be in the late game. You just have one more biome to go through in order to reach the final boss. As of the Castlevania DLC, there are now 3 possible final bosses for you to fight. What an exciting time to be playing Dead Cells. The biome choice after the second boss is the only one that's somewhat relevant in the run, as after that, it's a home stretch to whatever final boss you choose to fight, meaning your choice here is still just choosing which final boss you want to face. Again, you have a lot of freedom in choosing it, as any second boss can lead to any final boss, but with one exception however. Dracula can only be accessed from Timekeep. If you fought Giant or Scarecrow, you cannot route to Dracula. This is one of the weirdest restrictions I've seen, but there have been rumors of more routes opening up. There's not that many distinctions between the 3 bosses, but let's go through them nonetheless. The default final boss is Hand of the King. You can really fight him with any build. He gives ample windows for you to attack. And once again for the record, this video is not a boss guide, so I will not be going over each of the boss's attacks in detail. If it wasn't clear already, the only choice that influences what boss you want to face is your build. Scroll fragments cease to be relevant because, well, if you beat the final boss, you just win the game. Hand of the King is overall a generalist boss that any build will find success in. Next up is the Mantis Lord's knockoffs, as well as the Queen. You will go through both fights back to back, from an exhilarating lighthouse chase to facing off against the Queen on top of your climb. Both of these encounters tend to have fast-paced fights, so for the average player, responsive weapons tend to be quite effective here. Namely, any form of burst damage can knock out the servants during the chase sequence, and you have a much easier time climbing the tower. The Queen has around the same amount of health as Hand of the King, but she has some fast attacks. Using a shield can give you some breathing room, and any turrets or ranged weapons shine greatly in this fight. When the Queen does the Reality Slices attack, you can actually still damage her. Drop down your turrets or shoot away with your arrows from far, and you can shave a decent amount of time off this fight. Finally, Dracula is the most recent contender of a final boss. However, you can only access them if you did not go to the Castlevania biomes in the early game, meaning if you've already fought Death this run, you can't fight Dracula. Anyways, I found him to be a rather generalist boss as well. His hitbox is generously large, but does come with more health than Hand of the King. This fight does have some unique mechanics that are never seen in the game before, like fireballs that can't be rolled through, or a grabbed attack that does so much damage it may as well be insta-kill. The fight feels more drawn out than the previous final bosses, so watch your health before committing to an attack. Finally, let's talk about the last set of biomes. Regardless of which one you go to, this is your last chance to finalize your gear before facing the final challenge. So go nuts on spending golden shots. It's not like you'll need it after this. First off is High Peak Castle. You've probably been here on your first couple of runs. The biome is quite dangerous with a plethora of threats, not to mention you have to fight 2 out of 3 elites to unlock the exit, though I highly recommend defeating all 3 elites to get an additional scroll at the end. Overall, a generalist biome for the base game. Next we have the Distillery, and I just have one tip for this area. Do not go to the Distillery. Okay, I'm just kidding, but this biome is regarded to have one of the most dangerous environments in the game. There's a bunch of traps and hazards that can catch you off guard, and if you do get hit by them, you can say goodbye to your health unless you can get recovery points from a nearby monster. The level structure goes something like this. You go through a series of traps to reach a key as well as a free colorless barrel launcher. Use the key to open up a door, and then use the barrel launcher to break open a wall that blocks the exit. If you absolutely have to come here, say for the blueprint of a certain overpowered turret, I recommend taking the Masochist mutation, as it caps trap damage to 10% of your health. Another nifty thing you can do is that by using the Homunculus rune, you can launch your head and control a barrel with it for a short duration. In addition, Distillery actually leads to both Lighthouse and Hand of the King, so there's a bit of options given to you there. Overall, I avoid this biome like the plague, and you should too if you value your sanity. The Infested Shipwreck was added with the Queen and the Sea DLC. This biome contends with Cavern as the largest biome in the game because this place is massive. There's quite a lot of platforming, and one thing I'd be careful with is the breakable coral floors. Some attacks from enemies can break them and cause you to lose your footing. The best way to deal with it is to just kill the monsters as fast as you can, or pick them off from afar. Other than that, there's not too many shenanigans to deal with, but you'll be locked into fighting the Queen as the final boss. Lastly, we have Dracula's Castle. As I mentioned previously, not only do you need to have not fought death this run, you also had to have routed to Timekeeper in order to access this late game variant of the castle. Other than a Medusa mini-boss that you have to fight, the structure is pretty much the same from its early game version. I will mention that there is a guaranteed curse chest here, making it one of the most dangerous curses to lift. Make it through and Dracula is yours to challenge. So that was a lot to go through. However, there's actually one more biome that we haven't covered. The bank is a unique biome that has a chance to replace any biome that is not a boss. It will appear once during every run, but regardless if you choose to enter it or ignore it, it will not appear again. The bank will have the same amount of scrolls, scroll fragments, and shop item quality matching that of the quote-unquote best biome that it replaced in that particular depth level. So if it replaced the depth 3 biomes, it will have the same amount of scroll fragments and shop quality as Ancient Sewers, as that biome is considered the best biome in that depth level. In addition to containing monsters of whatever biome it replaced, it's also got its native inhabitants that's unique to the bank. The biggest threat, in my opinion, is the gold gorgers. They will suck any nearby gold, and once it's been fed enough, it will transform into a stronger variant of itself. I strongly advise prioritizing these annoying things, as your situation can go out of hand fast if they go unchecked. Another big threat in the bank is the Mimic. It will try to ambush you whenever you purchase an item from one of the shops there. There's always one Mimic in every bank, so just be mindful whenever you buy something. There's always a food shop as well as a guaranteed curse chest. So when should you enter the bank? Well, sometimes it mostly comes down to personal preference, as I know some people really don't like this biome. However, there are some instances where enter the bank can be beneficial. Let's go through each case of the bank appearing at every depth level. If it replaces depth 2, aka the second level, I would not recommend the bank, mainly because the enemies here tend to scale poorly to your damage this early in the game. And plus, you probably don't have a good enough build going this early anyways. If it replaces depth 2.5, by the way, yes, it can appear for the optional prism biomes, this is an absolute no-go. I strongly advise that you do not enter the bank at this stage. This is because in addition to poor damage scaling, the prism biomes only have one scroll each, in the form of a curse chest, meaning you have to go through this enormous level only having one scroll to show for it. That's just not a good time. Depth 3 bank is, in my opinion, okay to go to. It's got a healthy amount of scrolls and boasts high shop quality. It's a good alternative to some of the biomes at this depth level, if you're up for the challenge. At depth 4, surprisingly, due to a bug that's still present in the game, the bank is actually not recommended. This is because when the bank looks for the biome that has the most amount of scrolls to match it, it will actually pick Still Village, when in reality it should have picked Slumbering Sanctuary. Why does this happen? Well, when it counts the amount of scrolls in each biome, it only counts scrolls that's a pickup from one of these tubes. If you look at the biomes map, all the depth 4 biomes except for Still Village will have one of its scrolls in a guaranteed curse chest. So even if they offer the same amount of scrolls, the bank will see that Still Village has 4 scrolls, while the other biomes having only 3. If you go on later boss cell levels, you're actually at a slight disadvantage, as Still Village offers the least amount of scroll fragments. Not very worth for a biome that's considered a challenging alternative. On earlier boss cell levels, it's not really a big deal, so feel free to enter it if you wish. Depth 5 and 6 banks are okay to enter. Near the late game, you probably have an ample build going, and damage isn't going to be a problem anymore. Of course, it's ultimately up to you if you want to take up the challenge. As promised, there is a certain route that's usually preferred by high boss cell players that they default to in order to min-max the chances of winning. Of course, Dead Cells doesn't exist in a vacuum, so alterations do happen depending on certain circumstances. The main goal of this route is to gather as many scrolls as possible, as that will allow us to reach an absurd amount of damage. while also having a fair balance of challenge and having a relatively short runtime. So let's take a look. Starting off in the prisoner's quarters, we take Toxic Sewers because it gives 3 scroll fragments, compared to 2 from the other biomes. Then Corrupted Prison for the additional scroll, then Ancient Sewers for its 5 fragments, which is the highest at this depth level. Then we fight Conjunctivius for another 5, which is again highest of the first bosses. Entering mid-game, we enter Graveyard. Now you might be thinking, why not Sanctuary? Don't you get 1 more scroll fragment that way? Yes, that is technically true, but many consider Sanctuary as a long and challenging biome, plus there's no food shop. Graveyard is an all-rounder biome that doesn't take too long to clear, and the food shop is there in case the player took too much damage. We then go to Cavern for its 5 fragments and amazing shop quality, then fighting Giant after that. We finish off by taking the shortcut straight to Hand of the King, skipping the depth 6 biomes, then face off against the hand and the run is complete. On 5 BC there's a bit more after that, but I'm not gonna go over it in this video. And we've reached the end. If you made it this far, let me just say, you are now on your way to becoming a Biomes master. Dead Cells is the only roguelike that I know of where it takes advantage of how player choice and levels can impact the overall experience. If you need a quick glance at all the biome details, you can check out the full Biomes map on the wiki. Have fun experimenting with different routes, and if you found this guide helpful, all I ask for is a like on the video. It really goes a long way. Good luck on reaching that next boss cell, and long live the grind.